Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WaKenya Washington State. Karibuni to our straight talk about COVID session with professionals. Welcome to our first COVID-19 straight talk with professionals hosted by WaKenya WaNorth in conjunction or collaboration with Immigrant Guide. WaKenya WaNorth is a community-based organization with the vision statement to create a vibrant, cohesive, and inclusive community that celebrates the diversity of its members and leverages them to build social support structures for people of Kenyan descent and their families. Our mission is to promote collaboration and inclusivity among individual people of Kenyan descent that reside in the greater Seattle area and Washington State by providing social support networks among its members. Today, we are here to celebrate the summer and to look forward to it with the hope of being able to host summer events such as our regular, summer barbecue. We're hoping that we'll be able to do that. But before we get there, we would really love for everyone to feel safe, to come out and join us. And as a result of that, that led us to partner with Immigrant Guide. And Immigrant Guide is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded in 2018, whose mission is to build a stronger, independent, more resilient community of immigrants and refugees through access to resources. They use innovative technology-focused strategies intertwined with social work theories to work with immigrant and refugee communities in the greater Seattle area to bridge gaps that contribute to daily living challenges in a new country. WaKenya WaNorth, you people understand how difficult it is to settle in a new country. So this organization, Immigrant Guide, provides social services, resources, and community building activities to support immigrants in the resettlement process when they arrive in a new country. Very, very important service. So they are partnering with us this time because they've been able to secure some grants and get some COVID vaccine clinics going. And we're partnering with them so we can make sure our people get access to vaccinations. But we understand that not everybody, feels comfortable right away to get vaccinated, especially now that, it's also open to children, and we'd like our children to be safe as well. Should we end up going out and, having a barbecue together. So during this session, we will be tackling issues to do with information about the vaccination, as well as some myths and conspiracy theories that are going around about the vaccination. You will have an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but we are going to have some professionals from our community to answer questions. So at this moment, I would like to invite our professionals to introduce themselves. My name is Grace Mongome, and I'm the chairperson of WaKenya WaNorth. Really happy to be here today. And our panelists are, starting with you, Anne.
My name is Dr. Anne Waringa, and I am with WaKenya WaNorth, and here to support today's conversation.
Thank you. Next, Dr. Frank.
Hi, everyone. Franklin Onchiri. If you wish, Dr. Franklin Onchiri. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm the other doctor. So yeah, as Dr. Ann said and Grace, we are here actually to help kind of support our community members by way of providing information, factual information with regard to the vaccines and answer any questions that you may be having, especially for those who have not yet gotten their vaccines and may be holding just because they're not really so sure about the vaccines. So we really welcome you to ask us many questions, those that can help you make an opinion or make your decision to go for a vaccine, because it's the only tool that we have to defend ourselves against this virus.
Thank you, Dr. Frank. We're really looking forward to this session. And next is Dr. B, to introduce yourself. Dr. B?
She's muted.
Okay, our technical team, Dr. B is muted. Can you please unmute her so she can introduce herself? Does it work now? Okay. Well, in the interest of time, I'm sure that we'll be able to get her unmuted and introduce herself. But Dr. B is a professional as well in this space, and we wanted to have her introduce herself so we can move forward. Technical team, please unmute Dr. B. Okay. Dr. B, would you please unmute on your end? Supposedly that's required as well. Can you unmute yourself?
Just at the bottom. If you look at the bottom on your left, there should be the
microphone sign.
Yeah.
That's the icon. All right.
Not yet.
So,
not yet, Doc.
Not yet?
Yeah, I think I can see her talking, but we can't hear her.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Dr. B. Your microphone is muted. You need to unmute on your end. Yeah, it was okay in the practice
Can
session.
you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yay, we got you. So
I'm so sorry. I apologize about that. Here I am. Yes, and thank you for your patience and your guidance. I was hearing you guys, but you couldn't hear me. So anywho, I am Dr. B, Bernadette Kimemia. I am not a medical doctor. I like that disclaimer. I am a doctor in nursing practice. And so I specialize in family medicine. And so in that aspect, I have had a share of dealing with COVID, educating our people as well as everyone in general about COVID, vaccination. And so I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Karibu sana. We're excited to have you here now. To just, to jump right in, maybe we could start with you, Dr. B. Can you tell our people about the types of vaccines and how they work against COVID-19?
So we have currently in the United States, there's several vaccinations that are out. So the two that everybody is quite familiar with is the Pfizer vaccine. So they're named by the manufacturer. So the Pfizer vaccine, you have the Moderna vaccine. There's also the Johnson & Johnson vaccine and AstraZeneca vaccine. So what we are mostly seeing in the US is Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna. These vaccinations are what you call mRNA vaccination. And what they do, so in short phrase, what they do is that they teach your body to replicate what we call spike protein that look, appear, and behave like COVID virus itself. So in essence, you're not getting a live virus from somewhere else that's in the lab. You're not getting, a less efficient kind of a virus. You're actually getting your own body to create a replication of what the COVID virus looks like. And so in so doing, it teaches your body how to respond to the virus in a controlled environment of your own body. And therefore, the hope is that then you develop antibodies, which are the immunity regimen to help with you so that if you get exposed to COVID, you are not one of this negative outcome people who have lost their life or left with a lot of complications.
Oh, okay. So what is new about this mRNA type of vaccine? Is that common, or is this the first time they're using this technique to prepare such a vaccine at such a mass kind of scale?
That question is to me?
Maybe Dr. Frank can take that and expound. This mRNA technique, is it the regular way that we are used to having vaccines made, or is it a new kind of way?
So let me say it's kind of a new way. The usual way has been that we previously, up until COVID, people used to get vaccines that are in the form of weakened germs, right? So they would get a virus, and then they weaken the virus, then they, introduced into your body, and then your body gets to develop immunity or defense against it. The mRNA virus, it's new in the sense that it's the first time it's been actually used to deliver a vaccine, but the method itself is not new. Actually, it dates back to times of HIV. That's when
Okay.
they started developing it. But just like Dr. B said, instead of now introducing a weakened virus to your body so that your body can start by developing defense against it, so that it gets to recognize in future when a similar virus infects the body. In this case, the mRNA, think of it, actually the easiest way I tried to kind of explain it, essentially they are instructions, like Dr. B explained. They are instructions that are introduced into your body, and they teach your body cells on how to develop defense against the virus. And then when it gets to your body, and then your body uses the instructions, the cells actually destroy the mRNA. So think of it like a letter I send to you with instructions of how to build the defense against it, to protect yourself. And once you get the instructions, you tear away the letter and you throw it away. Essentially, that's how kind of like it works.
Okay. And are all vaccines that we have that Dr. Kimemia mentioned in the United States, are they all RNA, or do we have another kind?
Actually, I think Pfizer, Moderna are mRNA, and then AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, actually, they have we call it adenovirus vector, kind of they use to introduce the vaccine itself. But for sure, I know the Moderna and the Pfizer, right, they use mRNA.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Dr. Kimemia, can you tell Kenyans a little bit more about the side effects that people can expect from receiving these vaccines? And does it matter the type of vaccine you receive, or it doesn't matter, you still could run the same type of side effects?
So, and I'm going to piggyback a little bit on Dr. Onchiri's conversation about the mRNA vaccine. I think it's really, really neat for everyone to understand that the mRNA virus, a lot of people, we have the stigma of we're getting some sort of the same virus that's killing a lot of people introduced to my body. How am I going to react to it? There have been some people that got the vaccination and got sick from the vaccination. So there's a lot of stigma and fear around the vaccine. Really, when you're talking about an mRNA vaccine, I am not injecting you with a lesser form of COVID. I am not injecting you with the disease itself. I'm actually, like he said, which is beautifully said, I'm sending you a letter. I'm writing a letter to your immune system, and I'm saying, look, these are the instructions of how to create the virus yourself. So then your body creates these little things called spike proteins, and they look, act, and behave like COVID. And then your body produces antibodies to fight it. So I'm not introducing anything. And that's like really, really positive to understand when you're talking about the side effects of the virus. You're not really reacting to a strange virus introduced to your body. So depending on the immune system, the strength, the efficacy, how your immune system is. Everybody has a different immune system, and we're made differently. That can kind of dictate what kind of side effects you get. So that there's some people who got the vaccination, absolutely had no side effect. I got vaccination. I felt my arm hurt a little bit for a day, absolutely nothing else. My husband got the vaccination and got really, really sick, had headaches, had cough, got really sick. So it really depends on what your immune system looks like at baseline. When you do then get this vaccination, if it jolts your immune system to where this is like, whoa, this is too much for me to deal with, but I'm creating immunity and these antibodies, then you might look like someone who might get some of those symptoms we see with the COVID, the cough. Majority of this, the similar side effects that we've seen are the pain or the swelling at the site that they inject the vaccine. Maybe some people have said, I felt that arm feel a little bit heavier. There's some swelling around there. There's some headaches. feeling tired or fatigued. You will see some nausea, a fever. A fever is just your body saying, I'm working on something, I'm building immunity. So there's a big realm of side effects that you do see, but everybody is different. And just because somebody got more side effects as opposed to the other does not mean that they were negatively affected by the virus, or maybe it just has a lot to do with their baseline immunity.
And as far as minimizing these side effects, what can someone do to minimize those that are expected?
So some of the things that you can do to minimize side effects is boosting your immune system. So there's been a lot of talk about vitamin C. There's a lot of talk about getting what we call high dose vitamin C. So you're not really altering your immune system or the efficacy of the vaccination. What you're really doing is just boosting your immune system. And so therefore, as it's creating this spike protein of the viruses, or as it's responding to the vaccination, it is not so jolted and shocked to where then you get a lot of these side effects. So some of those things, people do take zinc, they do vitamin C. It is unclear from the studies if that's like very efficacious, but that's the beauty of medicine. Some people say it works, whether it's proved or not. And because they believe that it works, then we believe that it works until such a time we can either prove it or disapprove it. So just anything that can boost your immune system would be helpful.
Okay. So would that then flow into like some of the preparation that one can do before going to get the vaccine if they haven't got it?
Grace, actually, can I add on something about the side effects? Because actually I'm a numbers person, so I'm trying to put context to it by actually thinking of it in terms of the numbers. So exactly like Dr. B explained, there is like a myriad of different reactions people have had to the vaccines. But I think also what people need to remember is, if you look at all the clinical trials, all the studies in which these vaccines were assessed, it's not that these reactions were only limited to the group that got the vaccine. Actually, even the group that got the fake vaccine. So remember, actually, our clinical trials are conducted is, so people are divided randomly into two groups, and then one ends up getting the vaccine itself with the active ingredient, and then another group gets the vaccine, something that looks exactly like the vaccine, both the appearance and everything, except for the fact that it doesn't have the active ingredient. So that's actually they are studied to determine whether it actually works. And oftentimes the patients themselves, they know that they may have gotten the active ingredient or not, but they don't for sure know which one they got. That's actually how it works. So when you look at all those studies, all these kind of reactions to like redness, the swelling, the fever and stuff like that, the headaches and stuff like that were actually both reported, both for the group that got the active ingredient and the group that did not get the active ingredient. So we can't really say that this is something that's unique to the vaccine itself. Just like any medications we take also comes with the allergies. But I think what people need to remember is right now, as of today, I think they've given out about 305 million doses of these vaccines in the United States. And about 141 million people are fully vaccinated. And then when you look at all the adverse events, so there is a way actually we grade them, or people in clinical trials grade them. So they can grade them as mild, they can grade them as moderate, or they can grade them as very severe, or some that can even become life-threatening. So if you look at all those studies, very severe forms of allergic reactions are actually like just negligible, way less than 0.01. So a very rare occurrence. So if you take the context that 305 million doses have been given, and all these allergic reactions have been very rare. I'm not trying to discount the severity of them, but I'm just showing that even compared to other medications that we currently use, actually these vaccines are pretty much safe, even have actually a higher safety profile compared to all the other vaccines that we use. I think, like I always tell people, the reason why COVID is always in our mind and we tend to know so much about it is, think of it this way. When the plane goes down, it carries 200 people. it's just covered by all the media houses all over the world, and it makes it look like the entire world actually collapsed in the plane. But think of it on land, all over the world. If you count in the number of people who died through road accidents, there may have been more than the 200 who died from just a single plane. The only difference is the media highlighting of the plane compared to road accidents. The same thing with COVID. So we have other treatments actually that have more allergic reactions than the vaccine themselves. It's just that for COVID, there is heightened media attention to it, so which makes it look like it's something kind of untoward for which people do not need. But if you look at the numbers, honestly, the allergic reactions and all the types of adverse events are very rare.
Okay. Yeah. Well, in fact, you bring up a good point there. I'm just wondering, you the numbers guy, can you explain to us this the issue of efficacy and frequency, and maybe tie into that what that Johnson & Johnson issue was from a numbers perspective, so we can understand, should we be worried or are we okay? Or is there a Cadillac vaccination versus a Toyota Corolla vaccination?
So yeah. So first of all, yeah, let's like pack up a little bit. So when clinical trials are being conducted to evaluate interventions, an intervention could be just a vaccine, just like the COVID vaccine, or it could be something we are telling people stop eating a certain food. So it's not really like a medication, but it's just a behavioral intervention. So what we really want to know when we calculate, first of all, we want to determine the difference between the success rate. So if the vaccine succeeded in preventing people from contracting disease in the active arm compared to the group that did not receive the vaccine. And then we end up calculating something which we call the efficacy. Essentially, if you think of it in simple words, it's the proportion of people who got the vaccine for whom the disease was prevented. Right? Among the people who got the vaccine, what proportion of them that the disease was prevented? But for COVID, I think what people need to know, there were two clinical outcomes for COVID studies. One was severe disease, and another one was actually death. Those were the two outcomes. There is one thing that people tend to kind of confuse: the prevention from acquiring disease. Right? Remember, actually, what we are traditionally used to is the idea that we take the vaccine, it prevents us from contracting disease. But actually, in the clinical trials, the original clinical trials, that wasn't really the primary outcome. The primary outcome was development of severe disease, so you end up in the hospital, or you die. So the efficacy that we actually talk about, like for example, when people say 95% efficacy for Pfizer, it's essentially, it was 95% efficacious in preventing severe disease, not preventing the accumulation of disease. Does it make sense?
No, you have to say that in English.
So right now, the benefit of taking COVID, which is what we know, is if you took COVID, it prevents you from developing severe disease. If you catch the virus, it actually prevents you from developing severe disease. So you end up in the hospital in the ventilator, right? Or if you become sick, you actually don't die.
Okay.
Right? But the original clinical trials did not actually, it's now they're looking at what percentage of the infections were prevented, new infections, right? Because that's usually what people are used to. You take the vaccine, it's supposed to prevent you from contracting the virus. But that's not actually what originally was looked at. So the efficacy we talk about, the 95 efficacy for Moderna, for Pfizer, it's actually with regards to 95% of those who end up taking the vaccination, when they catch the virus, they don't develop severe disease and end up in the hospital to require mechanical ventilation or some kind of treatment. Or 100%, actually, the most cool thing about this virus, in the clinical trials, all those who took the vaccine, actually, it prevented death by 100% among those who eventually got the virus itself. So there are two numbers, actually, when we talk. It's only that people tend to focus so much on prevention of severe disease. They forget that there was another number, that all these vaccines prevented people, those who took it, from dying when they got the virus itself.
Okay.
With regard to the question, which one is good? Here is actually I end up answering. It's more of saying which between Pepsi and Coca-Cola is good. With regard to the brand, they are different, but essentially, actually, they're pretty much kind of similar, right? So when someone asks me actually the question, that's usually the question I tell them, which between Coke and Pepsi is good? Okay, with regard to the brand, they look different, but actually, essentially, they're pretty much the same with regard to taste, with regard to efficacy. The numbers are kind of like different in the sense, but they're similar. They're within the ranges of each other. And the safety profiles are actually pretty much the same. So that if you were to ask me, I will tell you, get any one of them, you will be good.
Okay. Well, with that said,
can I piggyback on that?
Johnson and yes.
So I love that analogy, and I think just to add a little bit of it, what he's trying, and I can say that in a different wording and maybe it shed a little bit light. So when you do a clinical study, you get 10, 20, 30 people to make it simple, and then you bring them in and you have them sign all this disclaimer form, and then half of them you give them the placebo, which is nothing, and then the other half you give them what you're testing, and then you study the outcome. A lot of time we have our psyche, our psyche tells you, oh, I got it, I'm going to get sick, the same way he's trying to express. So the side effects are not necessarily because of the vaccination or otherwise. A lot of time it's because of our fears and how we go into the vaccine feeling. Now, when they test the COVID vaccination, what they were looking to do was not really to eliminate the disease. What they were looking to do was to help people from dying from COVID. So that if you contracted COVID, how can we prevent what they were calling SARS, which is the severe acute respiratory syndrome, that then you end up being on a ventilator and you're dead. So that the numbers they're looking at are the outcome based on, did they die or did they not? So therefore we're efficacious. Not did they get the disease or did they not? It was more so when they got the disease, did they actually die from the disease? And because they didn't die from the disease, then the medication, the vaccination worked. It didn't save them from getting the vaccination. And I think that's where a lot of confusion comes in, because later we're going to talk about why then do you keep wearing the mask? Why then do you keep social distancing? Why then after you get the vaccination, are we still doing a lot of these things? And, that we're still fighting to this day, even when you have the COVID vaccination. It's not preventing the fact that you're not going to contract the virus. That's not what the vaccination is doing. What it is doing is saying that if you do get the virus, that you're going to have a much lesser negative outcome, that you're not going to be one of those people who end up getting the severe disease, ending up in a ventilator, ending up dead. So the outcome is not as great and it's not as hopeful, because then we're talking about death as opposed to contracting the disease. And that's where a little bit of that confusion comes in. It's like, if I get it and I'm still going to get the disease, then why should I get it? Because if you don't get it, there's a possibility when you get the disease, you're probably likely going to die from it. And that's why you get the vaccination.
Okay. And if I already got sick, I'll come back to you, Dr. Franklin, with that J&J issue, because that one is a numbers one as well. But just to piggyback on that the vaccine's job is to prevent me from either ending up on a ventilator or dead, right? It doesn't prevent me from exposure. So if I do get exposure, I could actually contract the virus after my vaccination. So does it then make sense to get vaccinated if I already got sick? Can you speak a little bit to that?
So if you ever talked to somebody who had influenza, for example, let's take influenza, and you ever talk to somebody who had influenza, a lot of patients would tell me, oh, I got influenza once, and they'll tell me the date and time because they remember it exactly. And I felt like I was dying. So from then I always get the vaccination. Why? Because when I get influenza after, I don't get as sick as I got that one first time. So you have some sort of prevention. Your body is not, so to speak, a virgin, or, it's not walking in an unknown territory. It's been there, done that. It's not being very shocked to get the disease now. And then, you're not going to die, but you will likely contract the virus if you're exposed to someone who is, has the virus itself, but how sick you get and the likelihood of you having a negative outcome, which is death, is lessened.
Okay. So also I've heard that with the mutations that are happening with the virus, you could actually have gotten maybe a weaker virus when you were sick, and now there's something more virulent that you may not have protection against. So it does make sense to go get that vaccine even though you got sick. So thank you for that clarification, Dr. B. So Franklin, can you please explain to us this Johnson & Johnson issue? What was it? And from a numbers perspective, should I be worried? And I'm going to give a disclaimer here myself. I got the Johnson & Johnson and I loved it because I didn't have to go back a second time. But that was before they started talking about other things. So can you please shed some light on that?
I can take a shot at it, and then Dr. B, you be my backup.
I got you.
You be my backup. But here is my layman understanding of what happened with Johnson & Johnson. So Johnson & Johnson, when it came out, and it went through the process of evaluation in clinical trials, and eventually FDA gave it an emergency approval for use. So when it was being used, when I think millions of doses were already had been administered, some patients actually experienced blood clots that were also accompanied by reduced platelet count. That actually was the problem. So when they observed, I think originally they observed about like 6 patients who had experienced blood clots, and actually there was severe, I think, deep vein blood clots, and also reduced platelet count. And so what happened was the CDC actually and FDA kind of suspended the use so that they could look further into this issue. And actually, as they were looking further into the issue, they actually found out that it wasn't only 6, I think they found, was it 9? I forget whether the number was between 9 and 15, but they found additional cases actually of people who developed the blood clots and reduced platelet count. But remember, I said, I think originally it was 6 patients, and actually majority of them were women below the ages of 50 years, below the ages of 50. Above the ages of 50, actually, those adverse events did not occur. So bear in mind, just keep that in mind, that actually those who were mostly affected were women below the ages of 50. Then when CDC looked at it, they realized, okay, we have about like 9 new cases. I think let me say about 15. But then when they looked at it's around 15 cases compared to millions who had received the vaccine. So when the numbers were calculated, it came down to, for every 1 million people who received the Johnson & Johnson, only 7 ended up actually developing blood clots and the reduced platelet count. So that severe event was very rare, happening only in 7 out of 1 million people who have been vaccinated. So again, going back to treatments, including vaccinations, it's a balance between the risks and the benefits, right? So there is an adverse event that is very rare. And the reason why I say it's very rare, it's just 7 out of the 1 million people may end up developing this kind of adverse event. Compared to the other treatments that we regularly use over the counter, actually, that probably would be having a lower safety profile compared to this. So after some point, CDC and FDA actually determined and said, actually, the benefits of receiving Johnson & Johnson vaccine outweigh the risks of developing this. And so they gave it an okay for it to continue. So that essentially was the problem. So bottom line, it's actually okay to receive Johnson & Johnson. But just bear in mind, especially if you are a woman below the ages of 50, that chances are that you might develop blood clots and reduced platelet count. But remember, it's 7 out of 1 million.
Was it even 1 million or was it 7 million? I'll leave that for Dr. B to add her viewpoint.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dr. B.
Oh, so I was going to say the same thing. So, if you're the 7 out of the 1 million, it feels horrible, for people to minimize it. But when you're in the middle of a global pandemic, 7 out of 1 million, when you look at the percentage, what that means and you see the benefits that the vaccination is giving, it's a risk that you're worth taking, you know. You get sick, you have pneumonia, you get an antibiotics because we need to get rid of this pneumonia, but the antibiotics may give you nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. When you look at the risk versus the benefits, it's always balancing that. You know, if you're one of the 7 women who got the blood clots and got severely sick, you know, it doesn't feel good to hear that. But the truth of the matter is it often enough? Is it happening to a greater deal number of people that then you need to halt the vaccination? That when they went back and they looked, it wasn't showing to be the case. But if you're someone who do have, you know, in our communities particularly, we don't do preventative care. So sometimes we don't know what our underlying conditions are. And so, you know, somebody going out and considering to get a vaccination, the advice is get the vaccination. It's going to protect you more than the likelihood of having, you know, the negative side effects. However, you know, be warned that, you know, you could develop some of these blood clots. But if you're comparing, you know, I always tell patients, I said, if you can't breathe, nobody cares about your pain. If you're having blood clots, we can handle blood clots. We can work on blood clots. It's not, you know, there are things that we can do to help prevent the blood clots. But if you have COVID and you're on a ventilator, it's a different outcome. So when you balance and outweigh the risk versus the benefit, the advice still is to go ahead and you know, continue to get the vaccination. The same thing is happening now with Moderna and Pfizer, where they're coming up with this disclaimer of inflammation around the heart, that they found that some men are reporting what we call myocarditis. Myo is the muscle that surrounds your heart that is getting inflamed. And so there are people who presented with some symptomology of that who got both Moderna and Pfizer vaccination. Once again, you have to be able to, you know, that's why they kind of hold. They're like, okay, let's look at these people, let's look at their outcome. And if there is something that we can treat and you balance COVID death on one side as opposed to the side effect they're getting, then it makes sense to go ahead and continue the vaccination. It's doing more good than harm, so we are safely to proceed.
Actually, usually the way I try to tell people, I like to think of like simple analogies to explain things, especially when I talk to my mom and my uncle who is older. Think of the way COVID actually ends up killing people. It starts by isolating people. Once you become sick, you kind of isolated from your family. And the more sicker you become, you end up being put in a room where the only, maybe if chances are that you can communicate, you can only talk over the phone, right? And then when you die, no close relative of yours is close to you. So think of it like the way the lions in Masai Mara go about hunting animals. Here, exactly, the lion starts by isolating the animal they want to attack before actually they start attacking it. So it's essentially the way COVID operates. It starts by isolating you from your close family members, takes you to the hospital, you're isolated. When you die, no one is there. So would you actually want to go through that kind of death where no one is by you just because you are more worried about, you know, there are the risks, but like Dr. B said, if you think about it compared to other treatments that we commonly use, still it's very rare that it makes more sense that the benefits way by far outweigh the risks of taking it. And actually, when we talk of the benefits, COVID is not only actually the killing that it takes away life, it's the emotional toll, it's a financial toll. By the time you probably die, your family will be slapped with a huge bill. And the treatment for COVID patients is in the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So those are kind of like the figures we're talking about. Oftentimes, I think those things are removed from people, but also there is the emotional toll and the mental health that comes with seeing your loved one dying away from you and you could not be close to them.
Now, I also like to say, kutojua ni usiku wa giza. Saa hii tunajua, if you are a woman below 50 years old, then you know to look out for those signs. If you're looking out and you're, you know, prepared to go seek help as soon as you feel not okay, then I think you are safer than before this was known. So I'm glad the issue was found out. And it's also an issue with AstraZeneca, which is the only vaccine in Kenya. All your relatives back home, that's what the risk they're taking. Like, honestly, we're very privileged to even have the opportunity to say, oh, nipatie Pfizer. I don't want to deal with the possibility of clots. In Kenya, your mother, your grandmother, they are given AstraZeneca, and that's what
you have no choice.
It also has the same. Yeah, you have no choice. So I feel like we have the privilege. That's not to say it's not important to be careful, but I feel like there's a case to be made for, not but mouthing Johnson and Johnson, because I'm one of them. So there's a question here from the community. Someone's asking if there are mitigations for the blood clot issue.
If there
Is
are,
there a way to prevent? If there's any mitigation of the blood clot issue?
at least not that I know of. I mean, all I know is for sure right now, the Johnson and Johnson vaccine actually has that warning, right?
Yeah, it
Especially
does.
for people and women, at least to give that warning that hey, there is that risk associated with it. I mean, I don't, for sure, honestly, I haven't read, and I usually don't like answering something I'm ignorant about, but I haven't read of anything you can do to prevent that. But I know of friends for sure who were originally scheduled to get Johnson and Johnson, and they called back and said, "Can you reschedule me to receive something else?" And then they were put back to put back to the line, and they ended up getting Pfizer and I think Moderna. For sure, I know 3 of them who kind of declined Johnson and they got something else. With regards to what you can do to prevent that, I honestly don't know.
If you're someone who is sedentary, so you're 60, 70 years old, you're sedentary, that means that you spend majority of your time, that your risk to begin with of having blood clot is high. So you don't move, you're obese, you have high cholesterol, you are probably diabetic, you have blood pressure. So if you're someone who already is walking into Johnson and Johnson vaccination with already risk that can present blood clot as an issue, particularly being sedentary is a big deal. Where you don't move a whole lot, you're a couch potato, those are things that develop a blood clot. Back in the day, we used to put everybody on aspirin. If you're over the age of 45, you get an aspirin. Studies now show that there is more damage to doing people, putting patients on aspirin as opposed to not having them on aspirin. So there's not really something that you can do to mitigate the risk, but you can understand your baseline health and wellness. And if you're one of those people who have all those things that I spoke about, then you can do like the doctor said, you call and maybe have yourself considered for an alternative vaccination. But if you're not, it would be entirely safe to take the vaccination. The risk and benefit, as we talked about previously, is much, much less likely. If you do get blood clot, say you get blood clot from Johnson and Johnson, what does that look like? You go get a Johnson and Johnson vaccination, you go home, and then you start noticing deep vein thrombosis, that blood clots that will either go into your big veins, those are in your thighs or your legs muscle. So the signs of that would be, your leg is red, your leg is painful, your leg is, like it's turning discolored. So pain, swelling, redness, and discolored. If you notice this is what's happening to you, definitely seek medical attention, because you can get bad outcome from having a blood clot. There are medications that we do put patients on for blood clot, but you would need to have a blood clot for us to consider you putting you on those medications. So the thing to do is to be aware of your history going into Johnson and Johnson vaccine, and also be aware of what are the signs and symptoms of a blood clot. And then when you do actually have those symptoms, if you have a blood clot in your lungs, the majority of the things you feel is shortness of breath or some sort of a chest discomfort, then you need to seek medical attention in those cases.
Okay.
And I think we forgot to emphasize that if people have got concerns and they have their primary care doctors, if they have Dr. Kiminia, Dr. Waringa here, just go talk to them. Like, they can walk you through, like look at your personal profile and be able to advise you accordingly. I think these are discussions for sure. I think that's the piece I feel like sometimes we forget, that it's not so much like you have to make your own independent decision, but also if you have serious concerns for which you don't have clear answers, there is your primary care provider. Just go talk to them. They may be able actually to look at your profile, clinical profile, and kind of guide you accordingly and direct you to what might be safer for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Dr. Waringa, can you enlighten us a little bit on if someone is pregnant, is it safe to take this vaccine? Or are there also some, medications that don't work well with the vaccine?
I'm going to defer to Dr. Kimemia. She is more of family medicine. I'm more geriatrics. So by the time they come to see me, they are already past childbearing.
I love it.
And with my symptom, my area of focus is not pregnancy.
Okay. Dr.
So when
oh,
go ahead. I was gonna say, so when it first, when the vaccination first came out, I actually did a video on women page about this. When the vaccination just came out, there was some limited information when it comes to if you're pregnant, do you take the vaccination? If you're breastfeeding, does the immunity cross over to the baby? If you do get vaccination and you're pregnant, does the immunity pass over to your baby? So those are kind of the questions a lot of people were asking for. Or if I'm planning to get pregnant, should I get the vaccination? The answer is yes to all those questions. So that if you're pregnant and you do consider to get vaccination, the only contraindication really to any of this vaccination, the only contraindication to any of this vaccination have been anaphylactic reaction. That means that if you're the kind of person that gets some sort of reaction, you take Tylenol and the next thing you can't breathe and they have to use an EpiPen, or you take any medication that you've had a reaction somewhere in your life where the reaction has been that you stop breathing, that has been the contraindication. So if you're pregnant, consider taking the medication. If you're pregnant, there have been studies that have shown that the immunity or the antibodies do cross over to the baby. And therefore, when the baby were born, they actually were born and had antibodies showing that they got acquired immunity from their mother having the vaccination. Also, there have been mothers who have breastfed their children, and then there have been studies that have shown that yes, they acquired immunity from the breast milk barrier crossing over to the baby. If you're planning to get pregnant, yes, you want to be protected and safe, so therefore you should get the vaccination. So all of those questions is yes, 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 all of them.
And actually to add more actually to what Dr. B said, I think to make it even seem why it is even more important for pregnant women to be vaccinated. So in the original studies that were conducted, the original clinical trials, they did not include pregnant women and other people, like say people with underlying medical conditions. But over time, actually, we observed, studies came, and I think the last one I remember I shared on Facebook and on Telegram was the one that came from the University of Washington, that they looked at a huge cohort of pregnant women, and they found out that pregnant women who were not vaccinated, when they got the virus, most of them ended up actually developing severe disease and dying. And some of them even requiring, I think, I know what ECMO is, except like the layman wants to explain it. But it actually, they develop worse clinical outcomes. Pregnant women who are not vaccinated, when they get the virus, they develop very severe worse outcomes, including death. And so, and then I think they looked at the data, and then eventually actually they said, all pregnant women, unless you have the contraindications that Dr. B mentioned, you should actually prioritize getting vaccinated. And now CDC actually strongly recommends for all pregnant women to get vaccinated because the risks of them dying from getting the virus is way much higher than everyone else.
Yeah. That is a good point. So how about people with food allergies? Should you worry about food allergies if you've never had medical allergies? Should you worry about?
So if your reaction to food allergies is anaphylactic reaction, you have peanuts, you stop breathing, you need an EpiPen, you're contraindicated. But if you get a rash, if your eyes get red and irritated, no, not contraindicated. Yeah.
Okay. And how about
because and a lot of this is because the viruses are mRNA, so they're not made containing, like when you look at influenza vaccines, some of them they'll say the preservative contains eggs or milk or any of those things. So there's a mRNA vaccine. So I would say anaphylactic reaction is the thing to highlight.
Okay. Awesome. And how about people that have cancer or some other underlying conditions? You talked about, high blood pressure in passing. So maybe you can shed a little bit more light on that. if you have cancer or you have, you know, another underlying condition? Can you still get the vaccine?
Myself?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So when you're thinking about whether you should get the vaccination for COVID or not, the question you need to ask yourself is that if I get COVID infection, am I likely to have a negative outcome? So when you look at what we call pre-existing or comorbidities, that means that if I'm walking into COVID and I already have high blood pressure, I am high risk. If I'm walking into COVID or I'm going to contract COVID and I already have diabetes, I'm already a high risk person. If I have cancer and I get COVID, I'm likely going to be the one that needs the ECMO machine and life support, and I'm likely the one who's going to die. So if you have comorbidities or pre-existing condition, that's more of a reason for you to consider and seriously think about getting the vaccination. Because unlike someone who doesn't have anything at all, that is just a healthy Joe that goes to the gym and drinks water and have a good life, when you get COVID, you're going to be writing a different you're going to be having a different outcome. So you definitely are the person who needs to be considering totally emergently, urgently to get this vaccination. If you have, cancer, high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, any, asthma, COPD, any of these comorbidities that we talk about, you definitely need to be the one that gets the vaccination. And that's why when the vaccination first came out, when the vaccination first came out and it was like, who gets it first? They chose the people who are more likely to have those comorbidities, 65 years and older. They're more likely to have some sort of something going on. The other people who are younger, they might have a little bit better immune system, so they might do a little bit better. So that's even more of a reason for you to consider getting the vaccination.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about for children? We know that it's official now. Pfizer has been approved for children 12 years and older. Moderna has applied for approval. My question is about younger children. Should we expect that they're also going to get vaccinated at some point, or how is this thing expected to pan out? Any of the panelists can pick that one.
I think my impression is, and I think from what I've read, there are ongoing clinical trials looking at the safety of these vaccines in younger children. What they are sure of, it's actually safe for kids 12 years to 15 years. Actually, the moment FDA gave emergency approval for kids between ages 12 to 15, I just signed up my kid the same night, right? And she got, actually she's going for second, the last one this Sunday. So, but for younger children, there are clinical trials that are ongoing until they come out and present on their safety profile. My thinking is, for sure, that I hope that eventually they want to roll it out to everyone, but they first have to find out that it's safe across all the segments of the population.
Okay.
And right now, I think the clinical trial that's taking place is so currently they're testing 5-year-olds to 11-year-olds, and then they're going to roll that out. And then after that, they're supposed to test 2 years old to 5, and then after that, they'll do 0 months to 2 years, and then they'll roll them out.
Yeah. Well, that brings me to another question: the question of booster doses. Because now, when we start getting into babies, I start to think, okay, yeah, so how long is it going to last? Is it going to become like the flu shot we get every day, or the measles you get when you're 9 months? Or, what are you guys seeing from a professional perspective with the need for boosters?
I can go. Go ahead.
Go on, Franklin.
No, I was going to say, from what I've been actually reading, there is still no, I can't say there is like agreement now with respect to what people think is going to happen, but for sure there is debate where people think that it may be that in the long run, COVID is going to be kind of like a seasonal virus, just like a flu, that's going to require people to get additional boosters. But the jury is still out there. People haven't really kind of like agreed on and said this is what's going to happen. But there are some infectious disease doctors and people working vaccines who have started thinking about the possibility that it may be that people may require a booster in future, but not yet.
Okay. And in light of go on, Dr. Ann.
So from what I've read, what they were hoping is once we get the
you're frozen.
herd immunity, where about 75 or 80% of the disease, and that is when they would be sure or not. What?
You broke, so you have to repeat. Yeah, it broke, you froze a little bit, so we didn't hear the whole sentence.
Okay. So what I said was, from what I've read, is they're hoping that we would get to a point of herd immunity whereby 75% or 80% of the population will be vaccinated. And at that point, it would be easier to manage the virus. But now, given that the vaccination they had hoped it would, we're still having people holding out, even in the healthcare profession. And what has happened is we're having all these variants coming out. Now there's the Delta from India that is here, and it is said to be more, the negative outcome is more deadly than the one from the European one, the one from London. So with that, it becomes very difficult to know whether there'll be a booster shot. What we know now, and that is what Dr. Franklin and Dr. B have been talking about, is when you already have the vaccine, you have some protection for the adverse outcome effect, even with these variants that are coming out. But for those who are not vaccinated yet, their risk is getting higher and higher and higher, because as this virus continues to mutate, then and it, as Frank said, it's like the lion rolling around, stronger and more resistant. And the people are unfortunately in the long run serious adverse effects.
Okay, so it sounds like the jury is out there. We don't know the new variants that will come, but we do know that we have some protection against them. So those may warrant that we get, renewal shots and all that. So the jury is still out there. But if you haven't gotten yours, go get your first one, because I've heard of the Delta. I didn't know that's what it was being called. Then there's the South African variant, the Brazil variant.
Dr. Grace, actually, I think Anne actually brought up a very good point, which is as to whether we may or may not need this one depends on the uptake of the vaccine, right? If we get as many people get vaccinated, if we get at least 80% of the population get vaccinated, to have at least reduced chances that we could randomly pump in someone who is infected and end up infecting someone, we may reduce the chances of actually requiring the booster vaccine. But for as long as people are not taking the vaccine and the virus keeps on mutating into new strains, who knows, probably the new strains may end up requiring a different kind of a boosted kind of vaccine. So I guess for me, if I were to use that, I would say this is even the more reason why people should just get out there and get vaccinated to even kind of as a strategy to reduce chances that we might require a booster. Right? As I always tell people, always the virus is ahead of human beings. It's always mutating and looking for other ways of evading. Okay? So the only kind of tool we have is let's get as many people vaccinated to reduce chances of transmission and getting hosts for whom it will mutate, become a different strain for which it will require a new vaccine.
All right. Great. So now that it's available, I mean, we have Immigrant Guide have put together a vaccine clinic on the 19th in Sacagawea. I hope I said that right. I do hope. Between 10 and 2 p.m. Please go get your vaccine so that we can all be protected. and that we, kama unasumbuka na fill in things on the computer, this is going to be a drive-in. You can sign up if you want, it's great, but if you just drive in, you'll find us there. We'll be really happy to see you, and we'll, keep you company while you wait your 15 minutes. And if you are a medical practitioner or a registered nurse, please register to volunteer your time to support the community in this. So in the remaining time, we would like to talk a little bit about some of the myths and conspiracy theories out there. So this is going to be an interesting conversation, but we'll try and keep it in the interest of time, maybe the next 20-25 minutes, if we can handle that. So I'll start with one big one that I had a friend of mine call me and say, hey, did you let your 18-year-old daughter get the Pfizer vaccine? I said, yes. I asked why. They said, are you not scared they're going to become infertile? I said, no, but you know what? An infertile daughter is better than a dead one, so I'm fine. Oh. So what do you professionals say about that? Professionals. Can you speak to that?
Personally, what I can answer is, at least I'm the type of person who likes reading new studies that come out. And I like to argue from, at least I can corroborate from, evidence. As of now, honestly, I haven't read a study that has documented that people who received the vaccine have gone on to become infertile. And actually, even when you think about the mechanism, the biological mechanism through which it will cause that infertility, it doesn't even make sense from a biological standpoint. But that aside, at least we don't have evidence as of now that people have gone on to become infertile. Actually, the only one I had, I think, when my uncle was arguing with me, and he's like 70 years old, and this was like, I hear the vaccine, if you get it, actually, you don't end up getting kids. And I kind of responded, you 70 years old, and actually, you're more worried about getting kids? so like the lifespan you have is like, which people will you choose? Worrying about having kids, or worrying about you 70 years old, kind of, living in your bonus years, right? So, but right now, I think the problem is people end up getting this information from social media, from people who don't have specialized training to understand these things. And that's why I think where it makes a huge difference to talk to, like, healthcare professionals like Anne and Benedict, because at least they have the basic training to understand how things work. And also the people practice evidence-based medicine in the sense that what they give you is what has been demonstrated to work. I just challenge people every time I find someone standing up because he got something from Facebook. Well, Facebook would be someone who is a grade 8 dropout who is just posting, and you have a university degree and you're taking up that thing and kind of perpetuating that conspiracy theory for something that has not been proven. That for me is where I try to tell people, when you pick something from social media, ask yourself, is this factual information? Has this been corroborated, or is this something for which I would rather ask a healthcare professional as opposed to making it the basis for your decision as to whether you get a vaccine or not?
So, and I'll answer that question, and I hope that I absolutely love your answer. I'd rather a daughter, a barren daughter than a dead daughter. There's actually there was a lot of issue about this, and I think I've supported people in answering some of these questions on my other panel. So when we talked about the mRNA virus, and we talked about what it does, and we talk about how it teaches the body to work, it produces that spike protein. And the spike protein, so when you look at the picture of COVID, and it looks like it's a crown that's kind of have like 10 tentacles that stands out like my fingers, it looks and acts like that. So it's producing the spike protein, and essentially the body is learning how to fight the disease. There's a spike protein that is involved in how, when you get pregnant, when you have sex and you get pregnant and the egg is fertilized, the way that it is carried by a spike protein, and it attaches to the womb, or it attaches to the uterus. So that way, that's what makes a viable pregnancy. so that it looks, it almost looks like COVID actually, the virus itself, because it attaches over to the uterus, and the better of the spike protein it is, then it means that yes, you're pregnant, then you're carrying a baby. There was a study by Johns Hopkins that actually looked at these women who got the COVID vaccination, and they went on to get pregnant. I think the study had 36 women, if I'm not wrong, and 23 of them attempted to get pregnant and got pregnant, and one of them had a miscarriage. But that was totally unrelated to the COVID. But because of the similarity between the spike protein that carries the baby and implants it on the uterus, and the spike protein that the COVID mRNA vaccination is producing in your body, a lot of people say, well, it causes infertility. It does not. It does not. There's absolutely no indication of that. It has actually been refuted and negated. But also the other thing to understand is that we're in a global pandemic. And a lot of things, when you ask your doctor or you ask someone, people leave thinking, well, they didn't really answer me, because some of this information we're learning as we go. Because that's why it's a pandemic. The clinical trials are still taking place. Things are still being learned. As you immunize more people, you're learning things that were definitely not evident in the clinical control trials. And that's why we have to keep saying, sometimes I'm not answering your answer, but it's not because I don't want to answer your answer. It's because that we are in the testing, where every single one of us is in the testing process as we get the vaccination. And that's why you have those 7 women who got the blood clot, and the study itself didn't have it. So we're going to continue to see some things come out that might be like, well, Dr. B said this, and now they're saying this. That's fine. And that's a risk that we take, as opposed to the risk of a ventilator and dead. So when you balance the seesaw, then you kind of take, it's 2 poison, you take yours and you choose which one. And the better of them right now is the COVID vaccination. I always tell people, from when COVID came out, I hit COVID in December with the people that I see. That's when we first started to see COVID. I lost about 300 patients between March to the following year. And by the time the vaccination came out, it wasn't a matter of should you get it or not. It was, I'm waiting for this thing. I'll be the first one in line, because I could see a patient, I could talk to them, I could talk to their family. They're doing perfectly fine. And 6 hours later, they're not breathing. And I'm like, it's not making sense. What's happening? And that's why a lot of us were so frustrated when this thing came out, because the people would look like they were doing fine. They would look like they're fine. And in a very short period of time, they will go to talking to you to, I can't breathe. And the next thing, they're dead. And so when you look at the COVID itself and the eyes of COVID and face it and lose someone, you don't want to take it after you've lost someone. You don't want to learn, the way we teach our kids. We're like, I want you to learn from what we're looking at. Don't wait to actually be the one that's going through it to learn. So I would encourage everyone, if you're out there wondering, should you get the vaccine? Should you not? Maybe I'm going to get this. Maybe Bill Gates is going to be putting a tracking device on my arm. Whatever the myths there are many, many, many. I would tell you, once you see COVID and you have it destroy someone that you would not have a debate. You would not be thinking about whether you should take it or not.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think, Grace, you also had that question about, in line with that, whether the vaccine actually changes the DNA, someone's DNA.
The DNA.
It actually doesn't, right? First of all, it doesn't. The answer is no, it doesn't. And why it doesn't even change it, like we explained earlier. So the mRNA is basically carrying instructions, right? It's basically an envelope carrying instructions to instruct the cells in your body on how to develop defense against the COVID virus. As soon as it gets the instructions, it destroys the envelope that carried the instructions, right? And throws them. So the mRNA does not it would have to get into the nucleus of the cell where the DNA is to change it. But it never gets there. It just gets to the surface, releases the instructions, they are used, the letter is torn and it's thrown away. So it never gets into the DNA, into the nucleus of the cell where the DNA is kept for it to be changed. So the short answer is no, it doesn't change.
It doesn't. Okay. And do you get immunity immediately after? Go on, Han.
Just to emphasize on what Dr. B and Dr. Frank have talked about, we're doing this presentation to encourage Wazalendo to get vaccinated. Pointed out, and we've had this discussion here in WaKenya WaNorth, our own people are very bad in preventative health. They are very bad. In the community lately, we've heard of people who were found morning after that pregnant lady, young man who collapsed at work and died. Let's protect ourselves. We're protecting ourselves. We may hear of all these things. Unfortunately, the side effects are subjective. I'll come into that and the other and the other. Yes, they're all there. And the power of suggestion is powerful, because if I said, oh, I had this, and that, and Grace is my friend, Grace will say, oh, if Anne had that, I'm not going because Anne had that. But what we forget is everybody is an individual. Everybody is different. Yeah. Our makeup, DNA makeup is different. My reaction to this will not be the same reaction for you or to you. So, and Dr. B gave a very good point on how to boost your immunity. If we're doing that, and because we are not doing the preventative health, and we have a very capable provider here who has 3 offices and can see you get vaccinated. And Grace.
Thank you, Anne. Let's get vaccinated. Na nikisha dungwa, am I good to go? Like, do I have to wear a mask thereafter, and why? Can somebody shed some light on that?
So I'll take that. So with the Moderna vaccination, you get 2 shots. So you get 1 shot now, and then 28 days later, you get the second booster shot. With the Pfizer vaccination, 1 shot, and then 21 days later, you get the second one. It is shown that 14 days after that second booster shot, that's where you have built the most of the antibody. That's where the peak of antibody is. So that it's safe to say that, about a couple weeks post the booster shot, that you're doing pretty good. When we talked about variants, when you're a virus and you wake up in the morning, your COVID virus, the whole world is chasing you. What do? You're like, we're not dying today. My job is to make sure I'm not dying today. So what you do is that you get smart and you get elusive of the vaccination. What you're trying to do is really replicate yourself so that you can kind of fool the vaccination. The problem that we have is that you have a lot of people who have chosen not to get the vaccination. And those are the people where the virus is becoming smarter and having all these different variants. And therefore, if you're the person who's been vaccinated, you're shown that you're protected even to these other variants that are coming out. So we still advocate for people to wear masks. I know the CDC came out and talked about removing the mask, and a lot of us in medical field get very furious when we hear that, because majority, there's still a considerable amount of people that still have not been vaccinated, and where the concern comes in. And that's why when you still go to the hospital, we're wearing masks and N95, and we're doing all those crazy things we were doing last year in March. But in the community, things are starting to get released, because also there's a huge mental health and psychiatric concept of COVID-19 and the isolation that we just also have to address. So I think it's trying to find the balance. But when you do get vaccinated, remember that you have a head start if you were to get infected. You're not being prevented from getting the virus. You're being prevented that when you do get the virus, you're not going to die. You still want to wash your hands. You still want to be careful and wear your mask. You still want to social distancing, particularly around those people who are not vaccinated. So the answer right now is yes. And as we move on to this, as these clinical studies continue, we'll be able to then come back and say, well, when they got vaccinated and 20 days later they got the booster and 14 days later they picked on the antibody, they had antibodies until such and such a time. So we need maybe a booster shot that comes in a year later or 6 months later or 9 months later. And then we will know how often of this COVID vaccine we will get, if any, just like we do the annual influenza vaccination. So that's still information to know down the road. But the idea now, you get vaccinated, still do those things, those good things of social distancing, washing your hands, particularly if you're a high risk person, just protect yourself still and protect others.
Yeah,
okay,
and actually,
that's good to know.
I like the way Dr. B has explained it. And part of the reason, especially for those people who live with their unvaccinated elderly parents or someone with underlying medical conditions, I don't know if you guys remember a few weeks back, there were news in the media about the Yankees players, the New York Yankees players. I think 9 of them, even though the entire team was vaccinated, 9 of the players actually were found, they tested positive for COVID. I think what they call breakaway infections. The good thing is, even though they were infected, actually, except for one of the players who actually kind of felt like mild symptoms, 8 of them did not even know they had it until they were tested. So, and they explained that by the fact that they were vaccinated. But what happens is, even if you're vaccinated and you catch the virus, you can actually transmit to someone who is not unvaccinated or who has an underlying medical condition. I'm one of those people actually, because we have a kid who has an underlying medical condition. Even though myself, my wife, and our teenager got vaccinated a long time ago, we still insist on putting the mask. Why? Because we can still get the virus and transmit to her because she has a weakened immune system. So that's part of the reasons why we still have to continue wearing the masks, just to protect some of the close family members or to protect the other people out there who are not vaccinated and who, if they got the virus from us, which for us we look normal, but then they end up developing severe disease. So that's actually the reason why, part of the reasons why they kind of continue encouraging people. Even now, I mean, some states are opening up, including ours. I think CDC is recommending for people, if you are close to your family members, you can actually take off your mask. But the idea is, for me, it's a judgment call. If I go visiting my parents in Kenya and I know they don't have a vaccine, I'm going to still continue putting on my mask.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so how, I have two questions tied together about skipping the second dose and intermixing the vaccines. So what happens to those who get the first dose and they skip the second? So that's question part 1. Part 2 is, can you get Pfizer number 1 and Moderna number 2? Or
people have very interesting questions. I'll answer that. I mean, you should take the same vaccination twice. And if you go past 21 days after the Pfizer vaccination and you didn't take it for whatever reason, you need to take it as soon as you can. If you take Pfizer, you shouldn't then take Moderna vaccination. The truth is, there is unknown what your reaction would be because the clinical trials were either Pfizer or they were either Moderna. They were not a mix of both. So it's unclear whether you're going to get immunity or not at this point, and we're yet to know that. But if you miss, I think the first question is more importantly, if you find that you've missed the vaccination, the idea is to get it as soon as you can. The second booster one as soon as you can. Don't keep procrastinating it. Make time. This is priority. I often tell people, you know, I've had people who say, well, I can wait. We find ways to postpone our health. We find ways to make excuses of our health until you're in a hospital bed that has absolutely no respect of your life or things that you have waiting, until you're in a life support machine and death doesn't know wait tomorrow. So it is important for you to realize and prioritize your health. And it is important for us to also know, we're from Kenya and I come from a place of very humble beginning, and I know people are struggling there at home terribly. And for us to also be in this great nation, the best country on earth it's called, and have have all these options that we have and refuse to take the options, it is one thing to say I don't know and attend a forum like this and learn and educate and empower yourself so you can get vaccinated. It's the other thing to be ignorant and remain ignorant without wanting to know, because death will not wait. COVID will not wait. If you do get it and you're not immune, nobody is immune. So it is important that when you do realize that you failed or you missed the second vaccination, get it as soon as possible. Don't keep procrastinating it, and try to avoid mixing the vaccination. And that's why they give you the card, because the card says Moderna or Pfizer. So when you go back the second time, you're following on the same thing. You're not mixing back and forth. And the other thing is that you should also not get other vaccinations. So this is not the time to go get your shingles vaccination or your influenza vaccination or pneumonia vaccination at the same time as the COVID. You want your immune system to be optimally fighting one thing at a time. So you don't want to be mixing vaccinations, because all of a sudden now you're so proactive. Do COVID vaccination. Once you're done with that, then do the influenza or pneumonia. But the priority now is COVID now. COVID vaccination is happening.
The only thing I can think about, Dr. B, as you say that, is the song we used to as kids sing. Changanya mchanganyiko, Bwana Yesu alikata, msichanganye mchanganyiko. Take your COVID vaccine, give it.
The other thing I think, like Dr. B said, if you go back to the studies actually where they looked at the timelines, the reason actually why you have to take, they strongly recommend you take the 2 doses. When they gave people the first dose and they waited, I think, for like 2 weeks, I forget it was 2 weeks, the efficacy of the vaccine was around 52%, essentially because people had mounted some bands, but it wasn't sufficient enough. And then when they got the second dose, and they were followed up, when the efficacy increased from 52 to 95%. So refusing to take the second dose is essentially taking, half the treatment, right? And that's what you recommend. So the reason why you have to take the 2 doses is you benefit maximally from the maximum efficacy of the vaccine by taking the 2 doses. And like Dr. said, right now, it's not know what happens. You take the dose Pfizer and you take Moderna the second. It hasn't been studied. So that's not something people can tell you. Why would you even want to interchange them, right?
Yeah. Usichanganye mchanganyiko. And you can tell yourself, maybe if I get the first one, I have 50%, it's better than 0%. The issue is with these new variants that are coming up, you want to be top shape. You want to make sure you have the most protection that you can have until things are figured out. So if you have that 50%, please go get your second one so you can get to the 100%. So we're coming down to the final run here. I have to bring up this one. This one there was issues in Kenya about it, and I'll just go for the jugular here. Is the vaccine made out of aborted fetuses?
We won't laugh about that, but the answer is no. The answer is absolutely no. There are ethics studies that go into these things. When you're talking about clinical study, sometimes it helps for people, for a lay person to understand. My son loves computer sciences, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, how do you turn this thing off? I have absolutely no idea. I'm clueless. So I can also understand how somebody think, well, they do clinical studies with the cord, and they remove the blood, and they do all this kind of stuff. They're ethics to things as to how and why clinical studies are ran. And when you're talking about aborted fetuses, there is a huge ethic issue there. There is just a humanitarian, not only humanitarian, but ethical issue. The answer, straightforward, is no. And so when someone says those outrageous things, there are procedures as to why we follow things. And there are people who campaign a whole lot, to make sure that we get rid of some of this bad names and bad things going on. I'll tell you very quickly before I go, there's a birth control medication called Premarin. 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 It is made of PRE is pregnant, MAR is mares, and in is urine. Pregnant mare's urine. That means that they hold horses. they dehydrate them terribly, and then they get their very concentrated urine and they make Premarin. And it is a very significant drug that is used. And there are people who run campaigns to make sure that things like this do not happen, anything inhumane, but ethics is a big thing. So when you're talking about aborted fetuses, I mean, the straight answer is absolutely no, that is ridiculous. It does not happen. But educate yourself. This is part of empowering, educating, look up information, talk to someone. There's no such thing as a stupid question, and this is not a stupid question, but it does make one laugh. But the answer is no.
So, and I think this is part of my frustration, especially with religious leaders. Okay? There are times actually I tell my own religious leaders, those I talk to, that just like when we look up to them to teach us facts from the Bible, they should also look up to scientists to explain to them things that are scientific that they don't understand. Because the moment they start explaining scientific things they don't understand, there is a name for them. We call them quacks, right?
Yep.
It's trying to explain something that you don't understand. So, like Dr. B said, for sure, the vaccines actually are not made from aborted fetuses. I think the one thing that the religious leaders confuse, and I feel like this is where it came from, it's first of all they're not made from fetuses, but at some point actually when they were developing the vaccines, I think Pfizer and Moderna actually did some what we call confirmation tests on the fetal cells, not the fetal tissues. Remember, fetal cells can be grown in the lab, right? And they're always grown in the lab. There is a difference between fetal cells and the fetal tissues. So in the beginning, they just ran those tests to confirm that the vaccine is working even before they started testing it on people. But they didn't really they didn't go around collecting aborted fetuses to test on it, which is where they confuse this concept. And I get frustrated, which is why I tell them, please get the scientists to explain to you there is a difference between fetal cells grown in the lab and the fetal tissues. And these vaccines are not made from aborted fetuses. But strangely enough, like I always tell people, it's the reason you get PhDs and all the other people listening to Kanyari, the dropout, because there is some kind of trust to be put into the religious leaders and the other community leaders. But then I get frustrated. There is this kind of thing where we forget that God also blessed us with the knowledge to question things and say, hey, you are not an engineer and you're purporting to explain to me how the plane flies. You are purporting to explain to me how the car engine runs and you've never been to an engineering class or you have no knowledge of it. And we don't get to ask the pastor this question. Actually, last time I had a heated conversation on my Facebook when I said I think moving forward, probably we should require pastors to be acting like teachers in class, where when they say something, we are allowed to raise up the hand and say, hey, pastor, what do you think next time? Because we sit there, take everything they say, even when common sense and our benefit of the knowledge we have acquired tells us actually that they're telling us something false. But somehow we keep on saying amen and amen. But I wish we had a way of actually raising up our hand and saying, hey, pastor, according to my understanding, and everything comes from, the Bible tells us it's God who gives us knowledge and wisdom, right? At what point do you discard that knowledge and then becomes the devil's agent? That's why I get confused.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be able to judge things like that. And for me, I see knowledge and education as one of the lights. It's one of the torches that God has given us. And we should be able to illuminate this light on the darkness of ignorance so that we can shine lightness on people and tell them the truth. And it's so sad, like Dr. B said, I always tell people that God may forgive us our sins, but sometimes He may not actually forgive us from our self-inflicted stupidity, right? Because He gives us the knowledge and the people to talk to, and we choose to actually follow other people. Like, how do you explain these things?
I am 100%. I am 100% behind you, and I agree with that very much. And I think that, when you're talking about religious leaders, when you're talking about Google, when you're talking about social media, there's something called, do some research yourself. We have, I mean, everybody, if you find everybody there like this, research things yourself. Look for something that, John Hopkins is awesome. University of Washington is awesome. These are major. CDC is a good support. So look for reliable sources of information. Go to their website, Google. They have 1-800 numbers that you can call, support lines that you can call if you have questions. But to really just see something on social media about aborted fetuses and you own it like it's your truth, and then you go tell everybody and it affects a lot of people, it's detrimental. And that's the part of what we call ignorance and racism. Things like racism is born out of that, is lack of, is not wanting to know better. So we have to empower ourselves and learn. And it's not like we know better than religious leaders or we all have an understanding of what God is expecting of us, but we do owe it to ourselves to really educate and empower ourselves and make the best decisions for ourselves. And our health is the one asset that we have and to protect. And when it comes to the COVID vaccination, I got the vaccination. I would go back and get it. And as soon as it's approved, anybody in my house is getting it. And I hope that is enough to encourage you. And, Dr. Nchiri said he got it. We have to ensure that people do get vaccinated, despite all the myths that sit out there. And there are going to be many and more are going to come out. But, do the due diligence to kind of educate yourself. And if you really find no information online, I'm on Facebook. We are all easily available. Text, email, let us, know how we can support, most definitely.
Yeah. A friend of mine said, go on, Dr.
Sorry, just to piggyback back on what Dr. Nchiri and Dr. B have said. Dr. B, you will attest to these. Patients will come and tell you, oh, I have done my research. And I'm like, where did you do your research? Oh, I saw it on Google. I always remind my patients, Dr. Google never went to medical school.
That's a good one.
So take what you read on Google with a pinch of salt. Just keep in mind that most of the information, if it is about adverse side effects, most of the people posting on Google are the people who have had negative side effects. You will not see, rarely will you see somebody coming to say, I read this on Google, it had positive outcomes. It's always the negative. The people who have nothing nice or nothing to say, almost. So let's be careful when we say you've done your research. Do it from reputable sites, as Dr. B said. Dr. Google did not go to medical school.
And I can tell you stories for days about patients that come to me. I've had patients all last year that will come to me and they're like, no, this is a conspiracy. COVID is dead, and especially with the president that we had previously, we had a lot of issues going on until they contracted the disease, until they got the disease and their whole psyche and everything changed. I cannot just tell you one person. I have a lot of people who look at me, they're like, you're the doctor? I'm like, yes, I am. Today I am. You Black South? Yes, I am. And I'm proud to be it. And I'm advocating and I'm telling you because I've educated myself and I want you to do the same, but I can't make the decision for you. But when they actually get COVID or their mother got COVID or their sister got COVID and is in ICU now, their demeanor, their mood, everything changes. They're hungry for information. That's the part where we cannot learn. We cannot wait to learn from experience. We must understand and respect that the science, there's ways that things work. Get vaccinated. Do not wait until you're coughing and congestion and the next thing you're in the hospital, quarantine, in an ECMO, respiratory machine, and dead. That's straightforward. That's how it is. And you don't want to learn then and wish what you could have done differently. We have an option. We have a way out. We have a guarantee. Take it. There's many side effects. There are going to be side effects that rely on, and every single person is different. We're going to hear more. This blood clot came out. The next thing is going to be something else. We're going to hear a lot coming out. It's a pandemic. We're learning a lot of information as we go. So don't just hear something. You're like, oh, did you hear what happened? That's why I didn't even take it. Take it, take it, take it, take it, take it. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a good way to end. And I think the other thing people need to realize is, even when you get COVID and you recover, you never go back to who you were before you got COVID. Actually, right now, there are so many studies that are showing that even for people who have recovered, some of them have ended up actually developing like heart complications that they didn't have before they got COVID. Some have developed like neurological issues that they didn't have before, and now people are seeing funny imaging in their brain that wasn't there in the beginning. And for those that developed extensive lung damage, some of them have recovered, but they still continue using oxygen. They are walking around with oxygen tanks. Or even if they don't use it, they still get to the point where they feel like they're running short of breath. So the idea is, it's better to prevent all these things by getting them vaccinated rather than actually getting the disease. And like Dr. B said, we always used to say that experience is the best teacher, but sometimes actually the classroom in which experience is teaching you could be actually in the ICU, or you just almost going to the morgue and you never come back to tell us what that experience was like.
Amen.
Yeah, thank you. We have one last question before we go, a last minute question. What advice do you have for people who are taking Benadryl before receiving the dose to avoid allergic reaction?
So I don't, you know, every time that you do something, you know, Benadryl belongs to a class of medication called antihistamine. Histamines are little immune system, you know, they're like the little hairs inside of your nose that kind of, you know, alert your immune system something is happening, so that they kind of, you know, they numb or they demean the responsiveness of the immune system somewhat. When you're talking about medication like aspirin, Tylenol, you know, NSAIDs, you don't, if you're in good health, the things to take, we talked about zinc, we talk about vitamin C. These are supplements. These are immune boosters. You're helping your immune system. But when you're taking an antihistamine, which is going to cause an immune dormancy a little bit, I think you're working things against yourself. I have not seen a study regarding the histamine. I really haven't, so I don't know. But usually in my mind, I'm like, what is Benadryl? What does it do? What is it going to do to my immune system? Why do I want to do that to my immune system that I really wanted to show up and do the best when I get the COVID vaccination? And therefore, there's no necessity for you to do that. Now, if you get an allergic reaction, say itchiness, there are ways that you can manage itchiness: oatmeal or bath soaks, you know, some creams that you can put on your skin that you're not putting in your mouth and having a systemic effect. So depending on the side effects, you know, I can totally understand if you're having like severe side effects and then you do need to take it, like itching, and all you're doing is itching, then, you know, then your immune system is saying it might need a little bit of a boost. But to take it in anticipation of, I would not advise for that.
Okay.
That's a good
Well,
response.
thank you. Yeah, that's a wonderful response. I think we're going to end it there. There will always be more questions, but we're here. Interact with us on our page. Thank you so much, Dr. B. Thank you so much, Dr. Ann and Dr. Frank. And thank you so much, our technical team in the background from Immigrant Guide and WaKenya WaNorth marketing team. We really, really appreciate all the people that have turned up today to share this time with us. I hope you've learned something. Share it with your friend. This will be available on YouTube. It will be available on Facebook, and you can revisit and learn as much as there is to know. We hope that we have at least opened your eyes on one thing or another and gotten you ready and primed for our community vaccination clinic on Saturday, the 19th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Sacagawea Park in Federal Way. Come one, come all. Bring your kids 12 years and older. Walk in, register ahead of time if you want. The link is on our Telegram page and on our Facebook page. Karibuni sana na asanteni sana. Have a wonderful evening and a blessed time. Thank you. Thanks, and bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.